What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I am sitting in my kitchen at my kitchen table with my coffee for today's video. I just felt like I needed some bright, natural lighting. You know, I'm usually tucked away in my office with my mood lights and everything, and we are gonna be talking about food in today's video, so I just figured I would switch it up. Let me know what you think of this background. I don't know if I really love it, but it's just for today's video because we are going to be talking about macros. And if you are an experienced macro tracker, you probably already know a lot of the things I'm gonna cover in this video. So this is gonna be geared more towards my beginners who literally do not know where to start, how to start, what they should focus on first. We are going to cover all of it in today's video. It's just been so long since I've done like a beginner friendly, like instructional or informational style video. You know, I know a lot of my OGs love a vlog and I love a vlog too, but sometimes people go to the internet or YouTube for longer format videos when they're looking for an answer to something, or they want like a full time-stamped explanation of something specific. And so that is what this video is today. It's just been so long. It's been literally 10 years since I filmed a beginner's macro tracking, and there are so many things different from 2015 compared to 2025, especially with nutrition and what we know now. So without further ado, I'm going to get on into today's video. Of course, as always, everything mentioned in the video will be in the description box below. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and click that subscribe. But let's just jump on into it. So first things first, let's break down macros. When you hear someone say, oh, I'm tracking my macros, you want to know what the heck is a macro. Macro is short for macronutrients, meaning the larger macronutrients of protein, carbs, and fats. So we probably have like a decent idea as to what the purpose is of each one, but just for like a general refresher, protein is the building blocks of muscle, right? Carbs are the main source of energy, and fats provide a lot of the optimal hormone health, just metabolism function, brain function, cognitive, all of that good stuff. And so the goal of tracking your macros is to track your protein, carbs, and fats. Now, the second most asked question that I get when it comes to macros is, how do I calculate my macros? And this is a very niche and individual specific question, because everybody's macros and what they're going to be tracking or should be tracking will be different based on a variety of things, right? So for example, a lot of us will use things like your age, height, BMR, roughly what your total daily energy expenditure is, how much lean body mass you have, what your training intensity looks like, and what your goals are. Because someone who is trying to actively build muscle is going to need a lot more protein and carbs, a lot more calories in general, than someone who maybe has a lot of fat to lose and they're just strictly wanting to be in a caloric deficit. Caloric surplus, meaning that you are eating more calories than you're burning, and a caloric deficit, meaning that you're eating less calories than you're burning. Now, how much of each and what you should aim for, again, is going to depend on a couple of things. And this is where I think people get it wrong, right? They go to like a generic macro calculator. We were actually just talking about this on my podcast for work yesterday about how people will often overshoot their protein because they use like a generic protein calculator or some type of macro tracking calculator that suggests a target number for you, and it will automatically usually resort to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And realistically, it should be anywhere from 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of a lean body mass, and this is in protein. So that's in my opinion anyway, protein should be the number one thing that you focus on if you are a beginner and you've never tracked anything before. So that's a good like rule of thumb in terms of how much protein to eat. But again, if you're trying to build muscle, you're gonna wanna be in a caloric surplus. And if you're gonna wanna be at maintenance, then that requires you to be roughly right around your total daily energy expenditure, and then obviously a deficit being below. Now, how do you know where you are in each of these categories, right? And the answer to that is going to be to figure out how to track your food and then track your weight accordingly. So what I mean by that is, if you don't know how much you burn per day, which as a side note, rings, fitness watches, all of that is a good estimation. I would say it's definitely not perfect and it's not like the end all be all to figure out your total daily energy expenditure. The best way to do this is to track accurately and then monitor your weight. Because if you're able to track accurately, like I'm talking to the T as close as you possibly can, and you monitor your weight, weighing in daily, checking for fluctuations, and then looking at the weekly averages, If your weight is staying consistent within like a pound every single week, I usually tell people to do this like for 4 to 6 weeks, then you know that you're eating right around your maintenance level, right? Because your weight is not going up or down. If you're monitoring your weight for this 4 to 6 week like trial period and you notice you're getting small increases, maybe 0.3, 0.4 pounds per week, that tells you that you're eating in a surplus. And then same thing on the flip side, if you're noticing the scale going down, again, looking at weekly averages, then you know that you're eating in a deficit. So in order to even figure out where you should be or what your numbers are, you need to figure out what you're currently eating and how it is affecting your body composition at this current moment, because you can't change what you don't know. When it comes to setting people in a caloric deficit or a surplus or at maintenance, I usually am on the conservative side as a coach, in the sense that I will only put someone in like a 10 to 20% deficit or 10 to 20% surplus based on their goals. And I don't like to go too crazy right off the bat. Now, of course, this is after we've already established our baseline, which I'll get into like what you need to track, how to track it, all that stuff in a little bit. But for the sake of figuring out how much of a deficit or a surplus, basically after you've done your protein, so you're either anywhere from 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of a lean body mass. And if you don't know what your lean body mass is, let's say you do have a lot of body fat to lose, or your goal weight is really far away from your current weight, use your goal weight as an example. If my current weight was 180 and I was largely overweight, didn't have a lot of muscle mass, but my goal was 150 on the scale, let's say, I would probably set my protein target around 150 to 160, because I don't really want to be wasting that energy unnecessarily on protein. And this is why those calculators can be a little bit harmful, because they will often resort to 1 gram per pound of body mass in totality. So even someone who's maybe really overweight and they're a male client that's 300 pounds and they're trying to get down to 200, it's going to suggest that they eat 300 grams of protein. And that's not realistic, number one, and that's also a waste of energy, because we want to make sure that we're balancing out carbs and fats to suit that person's needs. So when we go into a deficit after you've done your 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of lean body mass, and you have a good estimation as to where your total daily energy expenditure is, I usually have about 20% less than that. So if my total daily energy expenditure was roughly 2,000 calories, just gonna keep it simple for the sake of this video, I would probably start myself in a deficit of around 1,800 calories. The reason for this is because you never wanna go directly into a massive deficit. You wanna cut slowly so that you give your body time to adapt and you don't end up running out of places to cut from. Because the biggest mistake I see people doing when they just jump right into a cut is, of course, they don't know where they started from. So let's say they were wildly overeating at like 3,500 calories and they were only burning 2,000. Well, if you go from 3,500 calories to 1,500 calories, you're gonna lose a lot of weight very quickly, but most likely you're gonna put it right back on as soon as you're done with your cut or your deficit, whatever it is that you're doing, because it's not realistic to what you've been eating, and it's also gonna feel wildly restrictive. For most people, I would say the fat content can be anywhere from 20 to 30% of your total calories. And another really good thing to note, not that you really necessarily need this when it comes to tracking, because everything is already going to be in protein, carbs, and fats, and then converted to calories for the total calorie amount. But just so you are aware, 1 gram of protein equals 4 calories, 1 gram of carb equals 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. That means that every single thing that you eat and that you track is going to be made up of calories, obviously the energy, but it's broken down into the macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fats, based on how much of each, right? So in order to calculate something, let's say that you didn't know what the total calorie amount of something was, you would take the protein content times it by 4, the carb content times it by 4, and the fat content times it by 9, and then add all of those up, and that would equate out to your total caloric amount. Now, obviously we have lovely things like nutrition labels, which already do that for us. But one thing I also want to point out about nutrition labels are that they aren't exactly accurate. And what I mean by that is, if you were to take the things off of a nutrition label and you multiply the protein, carbs, and fats like I just said, it may come out to like an odd number of calories, like 122, and you will see the label listed as 120. And this is just because the FDA is legally allowed to round up or down by a very small percentage to make it even. So this is also why you'll see maybe at the end of your day when you've tracked everything, you might see that you've hit your calories and not your macros, or you've hit your macros but not your calories. And that is just because of the database of whatever app that you're using. You're entering nutrition labels that are already calculated, as I said, so they're not gonna have that exact calorie amount. Now, it's only gonna be a little bit, so it's not a huge deal, but just something to be mindful of when you are tracking, and understanding that protein has 4 calories per gram, carbs has 4, and fats has 9. Just something to keep in mind, and also just for you to note that fat is the most calorically dense macronutrient, which is often why things like nut butters, avocados, high-fat steaks, or any types of meats like that are going to be more calories than something that's lower fat. So let's say you've never tracked anything a day in your life, right? You don't have a food scale, you don't have a macro tracking app. Personally, I use MyFitnessPal. It's just because I'm a creature of habit and I've used it for so long. But I do have a lot of clients who use Macros First, My Macros Plus. There's definitely a lot out there, but I will say the MyFitnessPal database is very wide, and I do find that a lot of it is accurate. And you also have the option to scan things with a barcode, which I think a lot of apps are starting to do as well. But you can create recipes, create foods, which we'll also talk about, but you're just going to need something to track your food. The most important thing that you can do is get a food scale. Any food scale will do, but just something that weighs in ounces and grams. And when it comes to weighing and tracking and entering, I think this is where most people become overwhelmed, and they're like, I don't want to sit there on my scale and weigh every single thing out all the time. And number one, that's valid. It's not something that we grew up doing, right? So it is going to take a little bit of time. But after you understand what a certain size of something looks like, it's going to start to become easier. You won't have to rely on the scale that much. And that's ultimately the purpose and what we want to happen later on down the line. But for now, when we're trying to establish your total daily energy expenditure as well as your total daily intake, it is important to be as absolutely accurate and precise as you can, which is why measuring things in ounces and grams is really important. With logging accurately, that means we need to make sure that we know how to log certain things that maybe change in weight when we do cook them, pasta being one of them, rice kinda sorta, but a lot of the rice you can find in the database as cooked already, whereas sometimes, let's say if you scan the nutrition label on this is the Carbe Diem pasta rotini, you will see on the nutrition label that the macros are for the pasta dry, meaning that when you weigh out 2 ounces and in parentheses is 56 grams, again, to be super precise, I would use the gram. So weighing out 56 grams is going to give you the nutrition facts for this. That's really important to note, that your nutrition facts of whatever it is that you're looking at is 99.9% of the time going to be for how the product is as is in the box, which in this case is dry. Now, pasta is one of those things that doubles when you cook it. So I know that if I wanted to not really worry about weighing it out dry, I know that doubling 56 grams, which is around 112 grams, I can just scoop out 112 grams of cooked pasta and then log this. So I would not be, if I scanned this box of pasta, I wouldn't be logging 112 grams dry, right? Because I'm weighing it cooked 112 grams, knowing that the original dry macronutrients is how this is labeled as 56 grams. I think that is a really confusing and difficult thing for people when the nutrition label is for how the product is in the package, and then they don't know how to convert it if it's not as simple doubling like pasta. A good example of this would be meat. So on average, and again, this is going to depend on the fatty kind of meat that you're eating, or if it's super lean, it won't have as much change, but as a general rule of thumb, meats typically lose about 15 to 20% of their weight. A really easy way to remember this, and this is just because I normally eat in 4-ounce portions anyway, is that a 4-ounce portion of meat, like let's say I took ground beef directly from the package, 4 ounces, I already know off the top of my head that that's 112 grams. When I cook that same exact 4-ounce portion, it's gonna shrink to about 3 ounces of cooked meat, which equates to 84 grams. So you have 2 different ways to log this. Just like I said with the pasta, if I wanted to log in MyFitnessPal 4 ounces of meat, I would weigh out, for whatever reason, let's say that you're only wanting to do it cooked, right? Or you maybe forgot to weigh it beforehand. if I wanted to log 4 ounces of how the nutrition label was, like I scanned my package of beef and it's 4 ounces, 112 grams, I'm not gonna weigh out 4 ounces cooked, 112 grams cooked. I'm going to know that it shrinks like 15%, and so that's, like I said, about 3 ounces or 84 grams cooked. Again, this is where I think people overcomplicate it and they're like, wait, but it was 4 ounces, now it's 3 ounces, but I'm only eating 3, should I log 3 or 4? And it just depends on what it is you want to put in your entry itself. Because there are apps, and I know MyFitnessPal does this in the database, if you search like 84% or 80% lean ground beef cooked, there are people who have done that conversion and already added it into the MyFitnessPal database so that you can just log that and not have to worry or think about what you would have logged or would have eaten or what is that conversion, and you can just search for cooked. Now, the downside to this, or the risk that you're taking rather, is that you're trusting someone else's entry as being valid without really knowing if the conversion is correct. And I do see that quite often in MyFitnessPal specifically, people who have made entries into the database and they're actually not correct, or they're missing a macronutrient, or just completely off calories but the macros are right, or vice versa. So it is really important to double check your labels, and one of the reasons I like MyFitnessPal is because I can create my own food. So like if I wanted to do my own conversion for ground beef, I would know that I have my own already, and when I weigh out my 3 ounce portion, I know that I'm actually eating 4 ounces of meat. Honestly, just like with anything in life, the more that you do it, the easier it's gonna be. So don't feel overwhelmed if you're confused by looking through the MyFitnessPal database, or if you feel like you don't understand why something isn't weighing properly or not converting. You do have to do a little bit of math, and I myself failed college algebra twice and had to be put in remedial, and I am not good at math, and I do feel like the longer I've done this, the easier it gets, and it's not anywhere near as overwhelming as it was to me in the beginning. So after you've kind of started weighing and tracking and logging into MyFitnessPal, again, making sure that you're checking the entries, making sure that you're doing everything as accurately as possible and keeping track of your weight, now we need to basically figure out where our numbers are gonna be set at. And like I said before, it just is gonna depend on what your individual goals are, but I think for the most part, a lot of people are wanting body recomposition or fat loss, and so they want to be in some sort of deficit. If you're setting your protein target at 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of lean body mass, and fat's around 20 to 30% of your calorie-wise total daily energy expenditure, again, we'll use myself as an example because it's easy, and let's say I wanted to be in a deficit. Now, if I wanted to take the 15 to 20% of calories, I personally will take it more from fats than I will from carbs, because I'm more of a CrossFit style girly. I love my carbs, I need my energy, and I'm really not willing to give up carbs as much as I am willing to give up fats. At the end of the day, it is down to calories in versus calories out. So it's not super concerning if you're taking more from one macro than the other, but I will say you're getting into dangerous territory if you take your fats too low. I'm sure if you've seen any bodybuilders in prep, you will notice that they're eating very minimal fats. Not that I think anyone should be in prep, but you know what I mean. They're in a severe deficit and they start to like lose their periods if they're a female. They start to have really bad hormonal issues, and it's just, I definitely wouldn't want anyone to take their calories too low anyway. But if you are gonna be setting it in a deficit, and let's say you found your deficit numbers, it's roughly 15 to 20% of your total daily energy expenditure. Now we need to figure out, well, what do I eat to hit my numbers? And the answer is that it literally doesn't matter to an extent, but it doesn't matter because there's no like set way of meals or set way of eating that's going to hit your numbers, because everyone has different numbers. So that doesn't really make sense to say that like one way of eating is better than another way, because there's not catering to every single person's macros individually. You know what I'm saying? So in order for you to figure out what you should eat to hit your numbers, obviously you need to have familiarity with what you're eating and how that is currently looking in comparison to what your numbers are. So for example, if I was someone who never tracked before and I tracked everything for a month straight and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm eating 100 grams of fat every day. Well, it's probably not gonna be the smartest idea for me to then put my fats at 50, because going from 100 to 50 is gonna be like crazy difficult given my current lifestyle and current way of eating. So with that being said, after you know what it is that you're eating, we wanna take that 15, 20% and apply it to that in small increments. So for me personally, I like to pre-plan out my protein first and then work around it with carbs and fats. I did do another video on this back in the day for how to pre-plan and log things in MyFitnessPal. I think it's really, really helpful to see it visually. And so that way you know what you have in your fridge, how you can fit it into your macros, what you need to adjust. Because I think another thing that people do that kind of sets them up for failure is that they try to go about their day while tracking, and that just leaves them at the end of the day with this like awkward amount of numbers that they don't really know what to eat to hit, or they're not hungry, or they're starving. And so I think just planning ahead and figuring out how you can structure your day that's similar to what you already eat is gonna help you so that you can lower your calories without having to change your entire intake drastically. So if we're talking about building meals, I always will just tell people to start with protein first, right? So put the protein in and then build your meal around that. So what do you want to eat for your protein? What would you like to eat for your breakfasts? If you want some ideas, obviously I have tons of meal prep, tons of full days of eating. I'm someone who is like a really, really, really big creature of habit, like I said, so I do eat a lot of the same things, but it just works for me. And at this point, I literally don't even have to weigh it. Like I know what my bagel sandwich looks like. I know what my chicken thighs look like. So once you start tracking it and figuring out what works for you, it's going to be so much easier. But I always tell people to start with their protein and then build their rest of the meal around that. And another thing that I think can really help beginners is prepping your proteins, prepping your carbs and your fats all separately. So that way when you need to build a meal, so to say, you can take individual portions of protein, carbs, and fats and put it together to make whatever it is that you need for that specific day. If you want to make sure that you're tracking your progress accurately as well, we want to make sure that we're weighing daily if you can mentally handle that, and you want to do it with the same variables, right? So in the morning, after you go to the bathroom, no clothes on, before eating, so you do it roughly the same exact way so you get a true reading of that weigh-in, and then you take the daily average. So we'd want to make sure that both of those things are happening so you can actually visually see, I'm doing this deficit, let's say it was me, right? And I'm taking in 1,800 calories, I'm burning over 2,000, and my weight is staying exactly the same. What that tells me is I'm either underestimating what I'm eating or eating, not logging correctly, and my intake is not actually 1,800, it's maybe closer to 2,000, or it's telling me that my total daily energy expenditure is not actually 2,000 and it's a little bit less. So in my perfect world, I always resort to focusing on the total daily energy expenditure first because I just want to eat more food. So if I were to run into that issue, I would personally try to add in an additional cardio session. I would up my steps and see if that increase in total daily energy expenditure then puts me in enough of a deficit to where I can start to see the fat loss. I know a lot of people are not going to want to hear this, but I think the biggest mistake that people make, especially in the beginning when they're trying to figure out what their macros are or how to track, they are eating out far too frequently or not tracking at all on the weekends. While once in a while is totally fine, it's not going to have that big of an impact on your overall body composition. In the beginning, it's really important to limit that because those 2 days of way higher calorie intake is going to bring up your weekly average. So to look at it as a visual, let's say you're doing 1,600 Monday through Friday. You've got those days on lockdown, right? You're hitting your numbers perfectly, you're weighing and tracking everything, doing amazing, sweetie, and then the weekend comes and you're at 3,000, and it's easy. If people think that sounds crazy, but it's easy to do that. And the reason why this is so important is because if you do that over the weekend with your 1,600 calorie Monday through Friday, it's gonna bring your weekly average up to close to 2,000. Now, if that were me and I was trying to lose weight and I'm burning 2,000 on a day-to-day basis, including the weekends, I may look back at that week and be like, I didn't lose weight. Well, yeah, I may have hit Monday through Friday perfectly and in my deficit, but the 2 days of super high calorie intake took my entire weekly average up, and then I didn't lose any weight. And this is where I think people will stop and say, tracking macros doesn't work, I'm not losing any weight, I'm eating in a deficit and not losing weight, and that is simply not the case. An easier way to handle this, in my opinion, would be to have just a smaller deficit throughout the week and still try to track your meals out when you go out to eat. And if you're drinking alcohol, that's a whole nother video in and of itself. Let me know if you want a topic on that specifically. But for the purpose of just learning in the beginning, I always suggest that people really try to limit their non-trackable items because we simply just don't know how much it's impacting your total daily intake average for the week. And it's really hard to then make changes if we don't know what exactly you're consuming. You are tracking and you're seeing the weight loss progress that you want to see. For me as a coach, I would say anywhere from 0.4 to 0.6 pounds per week is a great place to start for being in a deficit, same with being in a surplus. But let's say you've been doing that for 6 weeks and then it stops. That is when I will normally have someone do an adjustment. I personally don't like to adjust every 2 to 3 weeks. I think that's too soon. So I will have someone be on the same numbers for about 4 to 6 weeks, again, depending on lifestyle and adherence factors, of course, and then we make those adjustments. Now, if you've gone through this and you've been dieting and dieting and dieting and you're not losing any more weight and you've been in this diet for 6 months, wrap it up. It's time to wrap it up. We need to go back to maintenance. We need to reverse diet. I have videos on that on my channel, so go watch those if you haven't seen them. But we need to just focus on getting everything logged perfectly and understanding what that intake is before we even get there anyway. I think also with it being kind of annoying to have to weigh and track and log and think about math and Tetrising your numbers and all of that stuff. The best thing that I can suggest for that is taking the 15-20 minutes that you use at night for scrolling on TikTok and go into your app and pre-plan your day out accordingly, because then the following day you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to weigh it out. You don't have to remember, oh shit, I forgot to log it in my app. It's already done. It's already logged, and it makes your life so much easier. And if you find what I like to call like my staple meals or my staple food choices, it's so easy to have them pre-planned and ready to go because you're not having to think about coming up with new ideas or new recipes. I just eat the same main proteins and then swap the sides, and I know already, okay, if I need a little bit more fat today, like I've had chicken breast for lunch and I've had egg whites for breakfast, which are both higher protein, lower fat options, I know that I'm gonna have more room for fats later on, so I may be able to have a ribeye steak or something that has more fat for my dinner. So again, as you go through this journey and you start familiarizing yourself with what each item has and what your foods look like, it becomes so much easier for you to structure your day. And the most important thing, the number one most important thing that nobody likes to hear is that it takes so long. Like so long. I am not even gonna lie to you. It is not something where you're gonna track your macros for 2 weeks and then have this whole body recomposition. Girl, I wish. And that's not the case. I have been literally tracking my food, training intensely, doing something to help grow my muscles for the last decade, 10 years. Okay, so this is not just oh, I tracked my macros for 3 weeks, it doesn't work, I'm not losing weight, I'm giving up. Well, then you're never gonna get anywhere. You have to stay consistent. You have to be honest and realistic with yourself. If you are not honest with yourself, there's no point in logging anything, especially if you're sending it to a coach, because they need to be able to understand what it is you're eating in order to change that. So number one most important thing is being honest and being accurate. I know sometimes that doesn't always happen intentionally with being accurate or not accurate. So just trying to really understand and grasp how to log things, how to weigh things properly, and how to log it is gonna help you so much with understanding what you're eating and how to change it. I hope that answers your questions on macros, setting targets, what they are, how to do it, what to use. Let me know if I missed anything or if you have any other questions. I'm always happy to answer and to help you guys with anything. And of course, I do take nutrition clients via Black Iron, so everything that you need is in the description box below. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you in next week's video.